Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. We are live.
I can't hear you for some reason.
Uh-oh. My mic is on.
You're not on mute. Interesting.
Can you hear me now?
One moment. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
There we go. There we go.
We are live.
How are you doing, Sheikh?
Good, alhamdulillah.
How's the family and everyone?
Everyone's good, alhamdulillah.
The month of Ramadan's around the corner.
Absolutely.
And we're almost through the halfway of Sha'ban.
Yeah.
So every time this particular season comes, there's an excitement that we're barely 2 weeks away from Ramadan. But at the same time, there's always this reality that we know that Muslim social media and Muslim Twitter is about to blow up, and everyone's about to get really excited about 15th of Sha'ban.
That's right.
So what are your thoughts, Sheikh? Anything to say?
The 15th of Sha'ban. So we were having a discussion earlier today as well. And what, I thought would be very interesting to a lot of people is to, kind of step aside, like you said, from just the he said, she said, and all the argumentation that people engage in, and then all the WhatsApp forwards that basically go around. There's an equal amount of WhatsApp forwards. There's the WhatsApp forwards that are basically telling you that it's the 15th of Sha'ban is coming up. And what you need to do is you need to go climb to the top of a mountain and then stand on one leg and slaughter a goat on the top of the mountain on the 15th. So there's these WhatsApp forwards. And then on the other hand, there's these WhatsApp forwards that are like, the 15th of Sha'ban doesn't exist. And it's like, no, there is a date called the 15th of Sha'ban. It does actually exist. So it's all these extremes. And I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. So we were talking about it earlier today. And what is very interesting, you shared with me a reference of Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, in Majmu' al-Fatawa. And then you had also mentioned, and I actually pulled up the actual verbiage of the qawl, of the writing from Allama Anwar Shah Kashmiri, rahimahullah ta'ala, great scholar of the subcontinent. And I thought I would kind of share that, and then we can kind of talk about it more from there, and hopefully provide people a little bit more kind of insight from a knowledge point of view. Allama Anwar Shah Kashmiri, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, هذه الليلة ليلة البراءة وصح الروايات في فضل ليلة البراءة وأما ما ذكر أرباب الكتب من الضعاف والمنكرات فلا أصل لها. So Allama Anwar Shah Kashmiri, as the brilliant scholars of our tradition always would do, he brings this very balanced point of view, and he says that there most definitely is an undeniable virtue to the night of the 15th of Sha'ban. And there are authentic narrations which clearly establish that it is a virtuous night. However, he then says what has been written in many books about all the different little kind of things. And we were talking about it earlier because we both kind of have a similar cultural background. For those that are watching and who might know, both of us hail from the lost tribe of Bani Israel, the Memons.
Not cool, Chef. Not cool. One cool thing that I was reading about the Maymuns is that the Maymuns, all of them are Muslims.
Yes,
So they're actually called Maymuns because it's a distortion of Mu'min.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you've ever known a Maymun uncle, you see how Mu'min got pronounced as Maymun, you understand that. So, but yeah, so in certain cultural backgrounds, there's all these practices about like people will read 100 quls and they'll pray like 1,000 rakat and they'll go and visit graveyards and they'll cook certain types of food and distribute it in the community. Now, those are things that normally are good to do. You should go visit your loved ones who have passed away, go visit the graveyard and take ibrah from it, feeding people in the streets. I mean, think about how desperately it's needed to feed people right now. These are all individually, separately, in isolation, in a vacuum, they're good things, but specifically associating them with the 15th of Sha'ban, Kashmir rahimahullah ta'ala says, فَلَا أَصْلَ لَهَا. There's no foundation, there's no basis, there's no proof or evidence for any of this. However, when he says, and I'll also share, because mashallah, you shared it, was very beneficial, what Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala said about this in Majmu' al-Fatawa. It's written, Su'ila Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah عن صلاة نصف شعبان فأجاب رحمه الله إذا صلى الإنسان ليلة النصف من شعبان وحده أو في جماعة خاصة كما كان يفعل طوائف من السلف فهو أحسن. He says that if somebody prays nawafil on the night of the 15th of Sha'ban, or even prays with a small group of people, like the people who live with them or a couple of friends pray together or something like that. He said like the Salaf used to do. Ibn Taymiyyah is saying the Salaf used to do. Then he said, then that's a good thing. فَوَأَحْسَنْ. It's a good thing. وأما الاجتماع في المساجد في صلاة مقدرة كالاجتماع على 100 ركعات بقراءة 1000 قل هو الله أحد دائما فهذا, then he goes on to say فهذا بيعة لم يستحبها أحد من الأئمة والله تعالى أعلم. And he says, but if people start congregating and praying 100 rak'ats, in which those 100 rak'ats they read the quls 1,000 times, then he said, and specifically attaching it to the night of the 15th of Sha'ban, then he basically says that there is no basis for something like that. And that was something that none of the scholars of the past, they ever recommended. And so what I would very, kindly instruct or advise our brothers and sisters who might be curious about this is, just as we heard from scholars much more knowledgeable than I'll ever be, much more illustrious than myself, they basically are saying that the night of the 15th of Sha'ban, I actually have a couple of hadith here. Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu ta'ala anhu narrates that the Prophet ﷺ said, يَطَّلِعُ اللَّهُ عَلَى جَمِيعِ خَلْقِهِ لَيْلَةَ النِّصْفِ مِنْ شَعْبَانِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala turns his attention to all of his creation on the 15th night of Sha'ban, فَيَغْفِرُ لِجَمِيعِ خَلْقِهِ, and he forgives all of his creation, all the people, إِلَّا لِمُشْرِكٍ أَوْ مُشَاحٍ, except for a mushrik, somebody who says, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
The first thing I hear when I come on is talking about mushrikeen.
Yeah, I was going to say that, but I also want to, before I continue, I want to compliment you on your pinstripe thobe that you're wearing there.
It's April. I actually got it made from my 1997 NBA draft suit that I wore.
So as I was saying, the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that Allah turns his special attention to all the people on the 15th of Sha'ban, and he forgives all the people except for a mushrik or mushahin. Mushahin, they say, is somebody who has ill will, anger, rancor, hatred in their heart towards their fellow Muslim. If somebody has that, then they are deprived of the forgiveness of that night. So actually,
in that, sorry to cut you off, but look at the irony in that the hadith is saying that people who don't carry malice are the ones forgiven, and it's nights like this that everyone comes crashing at it.
Ajib, in family,
Bara'a in some cultures, Bara'a telling us that this is the night where people gain their Bara'a, their freedom from the fire of hell. And this is the night where Muslim social media goes monkey on each other, and everyone decides to become very vicious and disrespectful over something that's clearly disputed among scholars. And majority of the scholars don't deny the night's virtue.
Absolutely. And Mufti Saab, what you're mentioning about is that, like, forget about anywhere else, like in family WhatsApp groups where there's nothing but family. People are arguing, they're calling each other names. You're doing bid'ah, you're a mushrik, oh, you are this, you are that. And people are like fighting even amongst family members.
It's very hard. I mean, honestly, it's like people turn so. What I'm trying to say is, like, after teaching Aqidah and hearing about the threshold with which a person of Islam can exist in while still differing with you on something, right? Imam Tahawi says Ahlul Qibla, right? The idea that your fellow Muslim is simply a person that prays towards the same Qibla as you. And I know reading that myself, I remember the first time, Sheikh, you and I read Aqidah Tahawi together, and I remember the first time I read that, it even widened my understanding of who is a Muslim.
Yeah.
And so to start turning, this vitriol and this venom against your Muslim brother or sister for something honestly as quick as one night, it's a one night thing, is it goes against every principle of theology that we have in terms of being inclusive.
Absolutely. There's another hadith as well from Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu anha, the famous narration, which there's a little bit more discussion about, but Imam Bayhaqi relates it, where at the end of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ says, "Atadri ayu laylatin hadhihi?" Qultu Allahu wa Rasuluhu alam. He asked Aisha Siddiqa, "Do you know what night this is?" And she said, "Allah and His Messenger know best." And then he said, "Hadhihi laylatun nisf min Sha'ban." This is the 15th night of Sha'ban. Inna Allah azza wa jal yattali'u ala ibadihi fi laylatin nisf min Sha'ban. God turns His special attention to His servants on this night. فَيَغْفِرُ لِلْمُسْتَغْفِرِينَ. He forgives those who seek forgiveness. وَيَرْحَمُ الْمُسْتَرْحِمِينَ. And He showers His mercy upon those who seek His mercy. وَيُؤَخِّرُ أَهْلَ الْحِقْدِ كَمَا هُمْ. And anyone who's got anything bad in their heart towards their fellow Muslim, Allah leaves them as they are. No mercy, no forgiveness. So we were, just for the benefit of everyone like watching and listening, Mufti Sahib brought up the very beneficial point that it's the 15th of Sha'ban. So what's a balanced, knowledge-based point of view on it? So the knowledge-based, balanced viewpoint is, it is a virtuous night. It is a night of virtue. And the Salaf would pray extra nawafil and make extra dua. Yaghfir lil mustaghfirin, yarham lil mustarhimin. They would ask for forgiveness. They would beg for mercy. And so there definitely is virtue. But a lot of the cultural things that have become associated with it, having these big cookouts and, congregating, like we said before, to pray like 100 rak'at in which you read 1,000 quls and things like that. There's no credence or evidence to that. Anwar Shah Kashmiri rahimahullah ta'ala says, La aslaha, there is no basis for that. And then I guess the next question was, Mufti Sahib, you made a very good point about this. Some people, because whenever there is a day or a night of virtue, one thing that is in the habit of Muslims, a very good deed to do, is fasting. So you made a very beneficial point, and that was somebody could fast, but with the intention you were mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, so the fasting thing is interesting because scholars have debated the ruling of fasting on the 15th of Sha'ban. It seems that a majority of the scholars are of the position that the narration that mentions the fasting of 15th of Sha'ban isn't established with authenticity. One of the teachers of one of our instructors at Qalam Institute, Mufti Muntasir, his teacher, Sheikh Fadl Rahman, actually wrote a small little treatise on the issue of the 15th of Sha'ban. And in there, he goes into a lot of detail establishing how there is no base to fasting on the 15th of Sha'ban. And I recall
for anyone who's listening or watching, Sheikh Fadl Rahman Admi is a very, very, very senior and top-notch hadith scholar and researcher.
Yeah, and Mufti Taqi Uthmani, I remember some time back, I'm talking about years back, maybe over a decade ago, had published something which was translated, and in there he said it was preferable to fast on the 15th of Sha'ban. And I recall Sheikh Fazlur Rahman kind of questioning Mufti Taqi Uthmani on the basis of his opinion. And if I recall correctly, Mufti Taqi Uthmani retracted that statement of his.
Yes.
Because because the arguments are so in favor of it not being something established. So therefore, when it comes to the fasting of the 15th of Sha'ban, if a person really wants to fast, there are some, you could consider fasting of the 3 white days, which was a practice of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he would fast on 13th, 14th, and 15th. We have Monday and Wednesday. Tomorrow's Monday. It's a sunnah day to fast. If you're wanting to fast on the 14th, that would be the 13th would be Tuesday, and the 13th would be tomorrow, Monday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Today officially is the 13th, and then Tuesday would be the 14th, and then the 15th would be Wednesday. That's if you're following the Saudi calendar. Otherwise, there are other calculations out there. So I think that is something. One of the other things that I recall hearing is the hadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that whoever spends more on his family on the day of Ashura, Allah will increase sustenance for the year. And I've also seen people making that claim for the 15th of Sha'ban. So the discussion of Ashura, I know that there are many narrations there, and then Hafiz Iraqi has his own, he's a scholar of hadith, master in verifying. He holds a position that there is some authenticity to that narration. But when it comes to the 15th of Sha'ban, a lot of these things don't exist. And I think the way Sheikh Abdul Nasser summarized this issue was very beautiful. I think it really
Yeah.
a lot of meaning.
To distill it down for folks who are listening and who are like, okay, now y'all are starting to talk about a bunch of complicated terminology. Very simply put, the 15th of Sha'ban is a special time. It's a special time to make dua, specifically for mercy and forgiveness. That's what we have in the hadith. And that pretty much is it. If someone, I think it's safe to say, I would not recommend fasting specifically for the 15th of Sha'ban, but in your family, in your circle of friends, if there are some people, because of their culture, their family tradition, they are fasting, just kind of make that excuse on their behalf. They're fasting for one of the 3 white days, Ayyam will be 13th, 14th, 15th of the middle of every month, or make the excuse that they're just fasting because it's the month of Sha'ban. The Prophet ﷺ used to fast very frequently all throughout the month of Sha'ban. So fasting in the month of Sha'ban is generally a good thing. So inshallah, it falls under the context of that. But if somebody wants to know the knowledge-based point of view, the 15th of Sha'ban is a special time, but it more specifically is special to make lots of dua for mercy and for forgiveness, and Allah knows best. So we had a topic for discussion for today, but before we get to that topic, there's something very important that we need to touch on. Okay, the people need to know. Mufti Kamani.
Oh goodness.
That ridiculous chai mug thing that you have that warms itself. Do you have it? Do you have it with you at home?
Unfortunately, I did not take that from Qalam, and I hit myself every day for not taking it.
So it got shaheed in coronavirus.
I'm separated from it. We have to put it on right now.
Why don't we send someone to go get that for you?
Social distancing. The mug. See, Mufti Saab, the mug is social distancing from you.
Why are you acting like Qalam campus has coronavirus in it?
I checked
no people there. It's actually probably one of the safest places to be.
Really, nobody's there.
Into my app. I log into my app and I look at my mug, and it hurts me, man, that we're this far away from each other.
But I need to make a point, because I had an idea. Because in any of these, like whenever we do Hangouts, I haven't seen that ridiculous thing in your hand. So I have a point to make. I think we can all agree now that is non-essential.
Oh, it's absolutely essential. What are you kidding me?
So Ustad, can you explain to everyone listening what we're talking about?
So basically there's this.
Okay, Ustad, before you start, I'm going to tell you this right now. People are going to think you're a fool the moment you say that you drink tea cold. Okay? Go ahead.
I don't drink tea cold.
Go ahead.
Why is he attacking? He just started attacking you personally.
I know.
This is on both of you. I'm making this very clear. The world will witness, and Facebook is going to see this for what you guys are saying. Anyone that claims to drink tea cold cannot be trusted.
I love how personally he's taken this issue.
I just want to say I greet you with the greeting of the believers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's first. Second is that I'm with you. But if you know me, you know that I finish my drink in like 20 seconds. So it doesn't even touch my esophagus on the way down. It just goes straight in.
I start my tea at the beginning of lunch and it ends at the end of the third period.
Yeah, mashallah. See, that's the thing. So Mufti Sahib has the Ember mug, which is basically it's an investment. Let's put it that way. It's an investment.
Explain it to the people. The people need to know.
So it's basically a smart mug, and you can control it from your phone, and it keeps your drink. You charge it. It has a battery, and it keeps your drink. It has coils all around it, and it keeps your drink at exactly a temperature that you set it to.
You know what it is? It's one of those things that people used to buy from Sky Mall. It's one of those kinds of things.
Yeah. Mufti Kamani is definitely the kind of person that would shop in Sky Mall.
Don't hate the player, guys. Don't hit the player.
It's one of those things. So Mufti Kamani, I can go get that for you if you want. If you make dua for me every time you drink from it, I'll go get it for you.
Yeah. No, we're good. I have a solution to that, by the way, which I'll share with you guys some other day.
Okay.
So let's get to the topic. All right. Somebody asked me a question in the comments. Do the mugs behind you get used? And
that's
Qari Noman took the liberty to answer on my behalf, and he said, hell nah, he's a Maiman. Wallahi, that's offensive.
Actually, they're not mugs. They're just pictures of mugs.
So, all right. So now let's get to the topic. Enough nonsense. All right. I just wanted to make the point. I feel like Mufti Sahib, I won the conversation. Your mug is not necessary.
Sheikh, it is absolutely necessary.
You know, Ustad can actually tell you where this is coming from. Ustad, tell him, when do I do things like this?
When he misses you. Whenever Sheikh Al-Nasser is mean to you, it means that he misses you and he wants to see you. No, the Mufti Sahib, I also wanted to take the moment on behalf of the entire Ummah to say that we wish you congratulations on your Umrah.
We talked about it in the last hangout.
On your Umrah haircut. We want to say Mubarak.
Him and his sons, mashallah.
Yeah, did you guys do tawaf around Louisville Masjid?
No, you know what they did? They prayed like 2 rakats of Ishraq after Fajr. They sat and did and then they shaved their heads afterwards.
They ran back and forth from the mailbox to the front door 7 times.
So, all right. The topic for tonight's hangout was balancing the ritual and spiritual. And that's something
I now doesn't feel like there's any balance in this conversation. I'm just saying.
There's not.
I feel too balanced right now. I feel like I'm being tag teamed against.
Well, it's because you came out swinging, man. He asked me a question about your mug, and you just assassinated me in front of the entire ummah, man.
Well, I'll tell you this much: this haircut wasn't easy.
I bet.
It takes a lot of skill to do this.
How many cuts?
Who cut your hair?
I had to take the machine and go over my kid's head like 1,000 times to make sure it was even.
Yeah.
So balancing the ritual and spiritual, we end up talking about this all the time. I feel like in our casual discussions, conversations, in our text message discussions, this comes up like all the time because we hear so much feedback and so much from the community, personal experiences.
Keep going.
Yeah. We hear so much feedback from the community about their personal experience in regards to balancing the ritual and spiritual. So Mufti Kamani, you shared with me a couple of different, some things that, of course, anonymously, but some things that people have kind of shared with you about their experiences around this topic. Could you share some of that?
Yeah, so when we talk about the ritual and spiritual, I generally see there being two sides to it. There's one side of the line which is focused on making sure everything is perfect externally. So pretty much focused on this is the way things need to be done. So when you stand in salah for a man, right hand over the left hand, under the belly button, 3 fingers on your wrist, your pinky and your middle finger make a circle. Your eyes are locked on to where you're doing sajda, no movement at all. There's a lot of a lot of detail to how we're going to be praying salah. And so that's one side. And by the way, I'm not saying either side is wrong. I haven't made that claim. I'm just kind of laying out the issue. And in these circles, a lot of times there isn't any discussion on the spirituality.
None.
So, and I think there's actually reason behind that. If you ask, I think there could be reason behind it. Not that I'm saying I do that, but there could be reason behind it. And I think one of the reasons behind that might be that getting people familiar with the procedure is step one before you get them familiar with how to experience the procedure. You know what I mean?
So kind of like if somebody wants to like start furnishing a house, you can't furnish the house until first you build the shell of the house.
Exactly. Kind of like someone who's doing someone who's doing a bench press or someone who's doing push-ups. You need to first get your form right, which is all going to be all like, get this right, get here, line up here, do this, do that, and all that discussion. And once your form's right, then you'll have that second discussion of how to actually go and enjoy it. And then on the other hand, you have a group of people who actually dismiss the ritual, the legal part of the deen altogether. And they're only interested in the spiritual part where, I want to feel good. As long as I feel good, I'm happy, I'm good to go. They aren't too impressed by legal arguments. They feel contained and sometimes even restricted by discussion of ritual. For them, Islam is in the heart and practice is in the heart. So the two sides exist. And one question that I get a lot is that why is the ritual element of the worship important? Why can't we just kind of go through things ourselves? Why can't ibadah and connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be whatever you want it to be?
Yeah.
So that's like a common question that people have because they believe that this relationship, and I believe this question comes from a sincere place too. It's that my relationship with God is personal. True. And no one should be making comments on what kind of relationship I have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That argument could be made. And then the last part is, so if that's true, then my connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is based off of what I feel to be right, and no one else should have any input, let alone a faqih or jurist from 1,000 years ago. So what would your comments be on something like that?
And also like those same people have heard from, people of knowledge, and there are ahadith to the effect that, if somebody prays and they don't have any khushu in their salah, then their salah isn't accepted. It doesn't go above their head, so on and so forth. So they're kind of like, you're saying yourself, I've always heard it's the focus, it's the quality, it's the connection of the heart. As-salatu mi'rajul mu'min. So at the end of the day, why are you obsessing over where your pinky is and where your toes are and how much your knees are bent or your elbows are out or what, when in reality, y'all keep saying that it's inside is what really matters. So they can always make that argument as well.
Yeah. So, there's one, I have the Quran that I recall reading, and I was checking the tafsir on it too. The ayah is from Surah Mulk. Allah Azza wa Jal says, الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا.
Beautiful.
الذي خلق الموت والحياة. Allah is the one who created life and death, ليبلوكم, so he can test you, أيكم أحسن عملا, which one of you has the best deeds.
Yeah.
So the tafsir that Fakhruddin al-Razi rahimahullah ta'ala provided under this verse, when he says which one of you has the best deeds, he says the best of deeds will be that deed which meets 2 points. And he says, Ahsanu amala, the best of deeds, 2 points must be met. The first one, he says, is aqrabu ila sunnah.
Yes.
And then the last one is akhlas. So the first is that deed must be in line with the sunnah of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
Absolutely.
That's that ritual part. And then the second part is that it must be sincere, and that's that spiritual part. In Islam, when it comes to most of our affairs, we look at them from the lens of whether it's amr ta'abbudi or otherwise. Amr ta'abbudi refers to a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is ritual in its nature. So therefore, we don't analyze it from a logical perspective. We don't analyze wudu from a logical perspective because it's amr ta'abbudi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to do it this way. فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ مِنَ الْمَرَافِقِ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ مِنَ الْكَعْبَيْنِ. And Allah commanded us to do wudu this way. So this is how we do wudu, and that's that.
But that doesn't close the door on doing tadabbur and tafakkur of what are some of the wisdoms behind it. Correct, Musab?
Yeah. So when we're talking about amr ta'abudi and there is no sort of logical process that goes into analyzing why this ruling exists, I'm speaking of why it exists as opposed to why we should or shouldn't do it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a big, like, the reason why I'm bringing that up specifically is because when it comes to umur that are ta'abbudi, I think one of the big things that people develop resentment for is that when they're being taught it from a fiqhi lens and not like an imani lens. And so the response about why we do it this way is because Allah said so, which is, by the way, it's a true statement. This is why we do it this way. Allah said so. Literally, ta'abbudi, we're doing it out of devotion and worship to Allah, servitude. But at the same time, if a person's asking, what are some of the wisdoms and why we do it this way?
And I was also going to chime in, Ustad. What you said there is really profound, right? Like, we do it because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said so. That's actually a very sophisticated response.
Yeah, I was going to say that's like a high level of spiritual maqam, right? Because
but you were making the point, sorry to interrupt, that's a very sophisticated response. But what you were saying was, like, and part of what I would add to what you were saying is, but are we sure that everybody really understands what you mean or what you imply by that?
And don't use that like a sledgehammer, like, I think like it's important to entertain people's intellectual, because you're not, we're growing up in a very skeptical society. Everyone's empirical. Everyone wants to know why we're doing something and why it makes sense. Mm-hmm. Everything everything demands proof, even Absolutely. From people who are born into Islam. And so I think this is almost like a back home sort of Eastern mentality, whether it's Pakistan or Egypt or Turkey or anything, which is like, just memorize it and ask questions later. Mm-hmm. But people are asking questions early. And so we have to encourage people to explore. And I think there has to be also, people can explore the wisdoms as to why something might be the case. Wudu, for example, is amr ta'abbudi. Like, someone can make the argument, does God really need us to wash up with water before we pray? Is that like a necessary thing? Like, why does God need that from us? And someone actually asked me that one time, by the way. They said, why is this so important? Why is this such a big deal? And I could have just said, because Allah said so. And if you disagree with him, then that could be kufr. So, good luck. But instead, I said, well, why don't we think about what wudu does for us? Again, these aren't like, we're not deriving rulings. We're not assigning definitive, illah as to why it exists. We're thinking. So we talked about preparing. We talked about how water refreshes a person, it wakes them up, like if they're drowsy. We talked about all these different things. And by the end of the conversation, it was a little bit less confrontational. It was more, okay. And then I said, and at the end of all of this reflection, this reflective exercise, at the end of it, we tie it all up together with a nice bow, which is, we don't know exactly why. We can reflect, but Allah Ta'ala told us to do so, and that's why we do it.
Yeah, and again, And while the books of usul on one side, for technical purposes, for technicians, people that are analyzing and extracting Islamic law, those books do talk about the idea that, not every ruling has an illah, mansusa, and or even ghair mansusa, but not every ruling has an illah, not every hukum, not every ruling has a reasoning. And while the hikam, the wisdoms behind these rulings are quite remarkable, they have zero bearing on the legality and the technicality. But on the same side, on the other side, though, when you read a lot of books of like tazkiyah and tarbiyah and things like that, it actually talks about how when you are teaching people, when you are teaching the general community, then focusing on the wisdoms in things is actually a very, very useful resource.
Yeah, they're not technicians, man.
Yeah,
they're not technicians. Like, why? And this is even in Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar, the fiqh book that we're reading, Sheikh. At the end, what does he say? He says, you know, وَعِنْدِ نَظَرِي, like, and in my own understanding, right? And he starts to sort of unpack and explain after he just did a whole textual based explanation of why something is the way it is. He then starts to explain maybe some of the sort of hidden reasons.
Analytical.
Yeah, analytical, right? He's presenting his own analysis, right? And that could be a little bit different than wisdom's, but the point being is that he's exercising, he's showing us that it's okay for us to exercise some of the wisdoms as to why. And I think for a lot of people, it's not that people aren't okay with this is the way things are. For example, we do it all the time, right? We do, you know, why do we have to board an airplane this way? Why is security like this? Why do we have to do, why does a hospital have to require this? Why do we follow protocol all the time that we didn't develop. Human beings follow protocol all the time that they had no part in developing. And in fact, they follow protocol all the time that they don't even want to follow.
Yeah.
We all do it, right? Because we can appreciate that there might be a wisdom behind it that maybe we didn't think of, right? We can appreciate that. And so I think encouraging people to do that with their faith, to say, you know what? There's no definitive reason why we do this. In Islam and fiqh, it's something that's devotional. It's purely devotional, right? But let's go ahead and do this exercise. You know who this works really well with? It works well with kids.
Yeah.
It works well with kids, because even as much as we want to flex our authority and say, because I said so, or because this is the way it is, and hopefully that's the end of the conversation, that's never the end of the conversation for kids. They may not say anything, but they're thinking about it. And so encouraging them to think positively and have husn al-dhan as to why something is the case in religion is a really good habit for them to develop.
Yeah.
It's a really good habit for them to develop, you know, and they can develop beautiful reflections. They might even surprise you.
If you don't answer those questions of theirs, they those doubts linger on. I was in Chicago, and while I was imam there, and I remember a young guy came to me and he sat me down and we had this long conversation. And in that conversation, he said to me that I've had questions about certain causes behind rulings and just wisdoms. And I asked my teacher once in a Quran class some of my questions. And my teacher gave me a whack on the back of the head and told me to shut up and go back to doing what I was doing. And he said that was the day that a doubt of Iman was placed on my heart. And I've harbored that doubt for 15 years now, 10, 15 years now.
You know, whenever a story begins, whenever Mufti Kamani begins a story with a person said in their Quran class that they asked their Quran teacher this question, it's always going to end up tragic. I feel like it's always tragic. No, and honestly, I'll tell you, like, a lot of this goes back to probably that the religiously educated class going back a century were not the most analytical of minds. In terms of the mass leadership, right? So you had, you know, your great scholars, you had your Ibn Ashurs, and you had your, you know, Abu al-Hasan al-Nadwi's, and you had all these people that were geniuses, right? But then, like, in terms of your local imam, your Quran teacher, your Hafiz Sahib, like, a lot of them historically, they did this because they weren't able to get into anything else, or because they had to, you know, find work quickly. They weren't coming from a position of privilege where they had access to become a physician or whatever. I remember once I was talking to somebody who was, you know, wealthy Pakistani man, and he said, you know, why aren't all scholars like Mufti Kamani or Sheikh Abdul Nasser? Why aren't they all like smart, intelligent people who understand our lives? And they, you know, I said, how old's your son? He's like, you know, whatever, 12 or 13. And I said, what's your plan for him? And he said, oh, he's gonna go to med school. I said, your son's smart? He goes, yeah, alhamdulillah. I said, why don't you send him to Islamic studies? And they were like, he was quiet. And the reality is that a lot of the spiritual and ritual tension that people feel comes from stories just like that. That a person wasn't able to analytically answer someone's question or even walk with them, right? Like walk with them along their doubt. You know what I mean? Yeah. A lot of people that have doubts, I don't have their doubts. A lot of people that have doubts that come to me, I don't share that doubt. Like, it doesn't bother me that Allah created hell and heaven and some people are going to go to hell. It doesn't bother me. Like, for me, for some reason, Allah didn't test me with that. But when someone comes to me and says that, I don't say that's just the way it is. Like, we walk the path together, and there's an end to that path. And we just, you know, at that point I say, you know, this is what it is, right? Kun fayakun, like, it is what it is. But that walk is so important for them. But I feel like the layman, the lay educated class of teachers, they're scared to engage on that conversation. because they're afraid of where it's going to go. You know, and by the way,
and a big part of it, I was talking to Sheikh Mikhail a couple of days ago. We did a little thing on emotional intelligence, and he shared the thing about just like listening. You don't even have to have like a lot of answers or rebuttals. You just need to be able to just kind of sit there and just listen. You don't have to agree with everything. You listen to them and you're like, okay, I hear you. I hear you. Okay, go on. I hear you. And at the end of it, just that exercise of just being able to just dump it all out might have been so profoundly therapeutic for them.
Yeah, I mean, how many times in the seerah do we hear stories of that happening? You know, people complain to the Prophet about things that he would never do.
Yeah.
You know, the young man who wanted to commit zina, or you know, the woman who just, you know, the ma'zura, the woman who was she just kind of like demanded his time, you know. And he said, it was actually the narration that we were reading recently. I forget, subhanAllah, the narration. We've been teaching so much online. All the stories are running together in my head, all the narrations. But
Adi bin Hatim.
Adi bin Hatim, yes. And he was like stunned that the Prophet stopped and just talked to somebody and just listened to them on the way, you know. But in ayah, by the way, that going back to your question, Mufti Sahab, about why do we do these things? You know, لِنَبْلُوكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. That's, you know, obviously the idea of testing the quality of one's actions. The one that came to me was the change of the qibla. Because specifically in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah Ta'ala says what? He says, وَمَا جَعَلْنَا الْقِبْلَةَ الَّتِي كُنْتَ عَلَيْهَا إِلَّا لِنَعْلَمَ مَنْ يَتَّبِعُ الرَّسُولَ مِمَّنْ يَنْقَلِبُ عَلَىٰ عَقِبَيْهِ. That we're just doing this to see who's going to follow and who's not. So there's an element sometimes of like, if you're looking for
qualifying yourself.
Yeah, if you're looking for like a logical reason, like for example, like let's do this question in a sterile environment. Is there any particular reason why Allah chose the Kaaba over Al-Aqsa, over Al-Quds and Al-Aqsa? Al-Aqsa and Quds.
I mean, there's no logical reason.
Like, is there a logical? Because it was the Qibla before, right?
Yeah.
So this is one of the reasons why God is showing us literally لِنَعْلَمَ مَنْ يَتَّبِعُ الرَّسُولَ, to see who's going to follow the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, or who's going to turn back. And then he continues and says, وَإِنْ كَانَتْ لَكَبِيرَةً إِلَّا عَلَى الَّذِينَ هَدَى اللَّهُ وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُضِيعَ إِيمَانَكُمْ. That Allah Ta'ala will never waste your faith. Meaning that this is all coming to full circle to test and see who has faith in Allah Ta'ala and who does not. And if a person's concerned that, you know what, now we're changing Qibla, or now I'm jumping into, you know, worshiping praying salah towards the Kaaba instead of Al-Aqsa. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about the qualitative questions that you have. Is it worth it? Is it not? Is it this? Does it make sense? Does it not? It's all about, Allah's not going to waste anything of your investment. It's all to see who's invested in following the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So anyways, this verse is the first one that popped to mind when you asked that question. Why? Sometimes it's literally just to see, are you going to follow? Right?
So Murphy, if I may, I wanted to go back a little to one of the points that you brought up, which I thought was very profound, and then we can continue from here if you like, which was the idea that scholars of the past and even many today, and correct me if I misphrase any of this, one of the reasons why people feel that their teachings were very burdensome was because they didn't do a good job when it comes to explaining the rulings to people. So there were two things that were on my mind. One thing that you brought up, which is a true reality, no matter whether we like it or not, it's a truth, which is that unfortunately, when it comes to studying the Deen, in many of our communities, the community didn't send forward their brightest and their best. I'm definitely not one of them. So you said it. I just wanted to give that shout out straight. But there are people in our community who, mashallah, are super intelligent. The Dr. Hatim al-Hajj's, you know, the Imam Zayds, the Dr. Shermans, and the Sheikh Amins, who are very intelligent people, and we thank their parents for guiding them and encouraging them to take this path or whatever it was that motivated them. I think another thing that also motivates or kind of pushes this conversation of why many imams back home didn't engage their communities. And I can't really fully wrap my mind around the whole issue, but I know that there's something there, which is that in those cultures, it wasn't necessary to take people that far into the conversation. Like on one of my last trips to the subcontinent, I was there, and I recall Someone asked me a question about doing wudu with nail polish on. So there were a group of sisters I was with them. Someone asked me this question. So as usual, I kind of broke down the issue, talked about the problems, different schools of thoughts, different opinions. Just kind of really tried to be as dynamic and as comprehensive as I could about the issue. And I remember the sister saying to me, "You've just confused us so much more. This is not how scholars here answer questions. We would prefer if you give us a simple yes or no." And then I realized that I think the way that we're used to answering questions is catered towards a community, because that sort of answering is important. I look at Fatwa Mahmudiyya, which is a famous known fatwa book, and also Sheikh Abdul Nasser knows Mana Yusuf Vidyanwi, his Apke Masail. Like these are famous collections of fatwa books, and a lot of their fatwas were simple answers that didn't necessarily focus too much on reason and explanation. Now, I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. I'm with you on that, by the way.
Yeah.
I just wanted to also throw this in there that there was a cultural reality where people were okay.
Yeah, Mufti Saab, to prove your point, I remember one time this an auntie in the community, she asked me a question about, I think it was Sadaqatul Fitr, Zakatul Fitr, right? The Fitra. And I went into this long spiel of, well, it's based off of this and this and this, and that can be calculated as this and this and this, and the wisdom is this, and the reasoning behind that is this and this. And I went through this whole long spiel, and at the end of it, she's like, how many dollars do I put in the box? And then I was like, $10. And she's like, "Pehle nahi bol sakte the." He's like, "Couldn't you just start with that? Can't you just lead with that?" She goes, "You just wasted all my time." And I was like, I'm sorry. And it actually was a very instructional moment for me of kind of reading the room, you know?
Yeah, no, I think that a lot of that also, both scenarios you guys are talking about, you're talking about people who either live or were brought up in, environments that were that culturally, and I'm not saying this in a way that's derogatory or that's condescending in any way, but culturally, and by the way, there's a lot of value in this as well.
Yeah,
that they understood the idea of authority, and they understood the hierarchy, and they understood and they valued that, but to some degree that could veer off into a little bit too much, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas the postmodern secular Western culture, America, the UK, Europe, hyper questioning of everything, hyper speculative and hyper skeptical about everything, and credentials and training don't matter nearly as much as a person's ability to articulate. Mm-hmm. Right. And so we're kind of living between two extremes, where you have one extreme where they're like, just tell me it's $10, I'll take your word for it. But because both of you were raised and trained, Sheikh was actually trained in Pakistan, but raised. Sheikh Nasser trained in Pakistan, by the way, everybody. Just want to remember that. Both of you guys were raised and trained and exist and live in an environment where you have gotten used to having to explain in good detail. We
were just talking about it when we started off the hangout, where Ustad said that sometimes there's something very good about that. I forget it. There's a very famous statement about like having the iman of like a simple little old lady from the country.
Hassan al-Basri, I think he said, like, I hope to die one day with the iman of the old village woman. Like, I can just take things like they are. You know what I mean?
That's it.
I don't have to.
So, like you said, there's a value in that, but we were talking about it in the beginning of the hangout, where like all these weird things come into vogue in the Muslim community because that guy said it. Yeah. Now, where did he get it from? Why did he say it? How did he say it? When? None of that.
It's a product of also like our world, like exposure to information is faster than it's ever been. Mm-hmm. Okay, like opinions are being established as facts before they're actually even opinions. Like it's crazy. Like it's the if you had to compare us to like imams or scholars or teachers or students, whatever you want to call, if you had to compare that line of work and answering questions to like the medical field, we would be like first responders in like a really, really busy hospital that's like in the middle of a huge like urban area. We're just like taking in like patients all the time, right? And I'm thinking like Cook County in Chicago, like just constant people coming in and all different kinds of problems. And so that being said, I think one of the realities that we have to deal with is that, alhamdulillah, is that it's trained us to have to think more analytically and more critically, because you can't just drop the Allah said so anymore.
No.
Right. And by the way, that is the end of the answer. Like that is always the end of the answer, you know. But look at the Sahaba, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, atadruna ma al-ghiba, like, do you guys know what ghiba is? What do they say? None of them even tried to answer. They said Allah and his messenger know best, right? Like that spirit is not common, right? That spirit of like God and his messenger know best, and then he defines it for them, salam. It's just not the world that we're living in. People want intellectually satisfying answers.
So Murphy, you brought up something really beautiful, which is that ultimately all deen and all Islam is legislated. And we know what the rituals are because these are widely studied, thoroughly researched issues. And when we tell people to do something, like when we say Islam says that when you do Hajj, do it like this. Like there are 7 rounds to tawaf, not 6, not 8. But if you're doing your circuits around the Kaaba, there are 7 rounds to it, and that's that. One big question that people have is, how are you coming up with this stuff? Are these rituals just made up, or do scholars just spit this stuff out? Do they just make this stuff up as they go along? And because there's so much and there's so many details, you pick up a fiqh manual, a Hanafi fiqh manual, something a little mutawwal with some detail, you could be holding 15 to 20 volumes easily in your hand. And there's so much detail about everything.
I mean, to establish your point, like you go through the curriculum we have in the seminary, from in year 1, ma la budda minhu, to year 2, quduri, to year 3, sharh al-wiqaya, to year 4, bidayat al-mujtahid, to year 5, hidayah, radd al-muhtar. It's like, subhanallah, there's like that.
This is a translation, but it's a translation of a mukhtasar, so it's like it kind of offsets, right? The translation obviously adds text to it, but the mukhtasar means like an abridgment. So this is literally one of the madhahib, and this is like an introductory book. This is a khuduri, like, this isn't like, you know, this is
basic.
This is it's foundational. It's good, but it's basic, right? And
but what you're holding there is practically a weapon. Like you could knock somebody out with that.
Yeah, I mean, like it's over 700. This translation, and the text is kind of big, and the publisher definitely made a lot of money off. This is 700. Yeah, it's kind of big. It's over 750 pages. So that's why. Okay, and I think
I cut Mufti Saab off. So just to prove your point, I was trying to say, Mufti Saab, it's like somebody sitting there looking at all this, and I'll throw the question at you, like, where's all this coming from? Did like a bunch of like fiqh drill sergeants come up and sit together and just come up with all this structure just to make people's lives more difficult or whatever? Like they're asking, where did it come from?
I think it goes even one step further. That we've said multiple times that our deen that we practice, the rituals are legislated by God. Did God actually say all of this?
Yeah.
Did Allah say this? Are you telling me that Allah said that if you say, I divorce you, that's one ruling. If I say, I divorce you, inshallah, that's another ruling. If I say, I promise to divorce you, that's another ruling. So you're telling me all of this has a different ruling because, you know, where is this coming from?
Yeah.
What's happening?
You know, one of the things that we do at Qalam, we have the Faith Intensive, which is basically an introduction to every of the core 4 sciences, right? So, you know, Quran, Hadith, Fiqh, and Aqidah. It's just an introduction. So you spend 8 hours one day going through a crash course introduction into how the science is. The goal is not to become a master, of course. The goal is literacy and appreciation of. So we want all the students to walk in gaining an appreciation of the science. Like, wow, this is real. Like people actually put their whole life into this. And then also understand literacy, meaning now that I've studied this for 8 hours, I can finally open up Mukhtasar Khuduri. Like I can open up an introductory textbook and I can understand some of the words, you know, qata'i, dhanni, thubut, dalala, things like that, right? So I can start to understand these things. And without fail, at the end of the week, because it's 6 days, it's, you know, 8 hours to 10 hours a day, without fail, at the end of the week, all the students who take Faith Intensive always say the same thing, which is, I had no idea that there was so much in this. Like I didn't realize, you know,
the nuance,
the
precision,
the concern, the care, like all of these
The
things.
thought, the deliberation, the process, all
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah. And so I think like for a lot of people, it's in their blind spot, it's in their blind spot. And Islam for a lot of people was very deeply intertwined with culture, which is probably going to be another Hangout episode at some point, but it was deeply intertwined with culture. And so where does culture come from?
Yeah.
Right? Culture is passed down traditions and heritage.
Generational.
And it is very democratic in the sense that people decide what culture is based on what they follow, what they don't, the way trends go.
Mm-hmm.
Religion's not like that. And so for
in fact, we end up talking about this all the time. When we, in Usul al-Fiqh, when we go through the Adilla Shar'iyya, contrary to all the popular rhetoric on Facebook and everywhere, we always end up talking about how urf is
like number 9.
Yeah, it's like almost like a non-dalil within Usul al-Fiqh.
Yeah, it's like.
Can you explain what Adilla Shar'iyya is, please?
It's like a gracious consideration. Adilla Shar'iyya is basically where we get our rulings from. So all the evidences in Sharia and at what sequence and at what ranking they all have.
So this is the crux right here. This is the real deal. I think understanding Adilla Shar'iyya will help understand the answer to this question, because the question is that how do scholars come up with all this stuff?
Yeah.
So do they make it up do they make it up as they go along? If it's not in the Quran, is a ritual something we really need to even care about? And I think this discussion that Ustad Murphy is walking us through is kind of it's the core of the issue. It's at least the first discussion that needs to happen.
Just in 30 seconds, just so everyone understands, basically where every ruling comes from, there generally the answer to that question is there's a source of some sort, right? Mm-hmm. Now the sources can either be primary sources or independent sources, or they can be dependent sources. And obviously if they're independent or dependent, their strength in terms of their application, their adherence, it changes based on where they come from. So you have all rulings, core 4, Quran, Sunnah, Ijma', Qiyas. So you have Quran, obviously the word of God. You have Sunnah, which is the example and the teachings and the example of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and including also, some other practices taken from him by the companions later. Then you have Ijma', which is consensus, typically referred to as consensus of the companions or of the Ummah. And then you have Qiyas, which is analogical reasoning. So being able to say, well, X existed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, or in this time, and X had this ruling, and because X and Y, which exists in my time, share this very precise and similar core element, then we can then adopt the same ruling because they're essentially they have the same foundational element.
They're comparable.
Right? Yeah, they're comparable, right? The analogy fits. So that's the core 4. These are independent, meaning that if any of these issues revolve around an evidence from these 4 things, it can stand on its own, right? It can stand on its own. But the ones that come afterwards, istihsan, maslaha mursala, urf, I believe is after that.
I think madhab al-sahabi.
Madhab al-sahaba, urf, sharia min qablina, all these different things. So istihsan and maslaha mursala are very similar, but they're basically making a means for an overall general Islamic principle, either using a text, connected to a text vaguely, or not even connected to a text. And then you have some cultural elements taken into it. You have the companions and their opinions that they had, because the companions differed on certain things. And then you have Sharia from pre-Islam. If there's an issue that is not addressed definitively within Islam, do we take? But these, again, are all dependent, meaning that they have to be tied to something from or connected to in some way, shape, or form the first 4. So the reason why this is important is because this is like, I just gave it to you in 45 seconds, and that was a really like bad hack job. Mufti Saab and Sheikh did it much better. But this list, like everything in Islam ties back to it, right? And you'll find language going. So and this is like lifetimes worth of study that people have done in terms of using these adillah to be able to extract rulings from the wells. Think of each one as like a well, right? And each well is providing its own sustenance for some questions, right? And you have to go to different wells to find answers to different questions if it's not found in one of the wells, right? And so again, it's all very systematic and it's incredibly nuanced, and it's just like going and talking to a lawyer, and that lawyer did, a decade worth of study and specialization and whatnot and certification, and you walk in and you're like, okay, this is what the IRS sent me, or this is, I'm buying a house and there's a lien on it, or there's something, right? What do I have to do? And the person just tells you like, okay, this is what you have to do. They're not explaining to you the case in 1968 that happened in Oklahoma City. They're not explaining to you the situation that happened in Seattle in 1978, so-and-so versus so-and-so. They've done all that research. They're just giving you the answer. So when a scholar kind of gives that answer, it's very similar to that.
Beautiful.
So I think that really just kind of lays out the foundation of it all. That when it comes to the deen and the rituals and some of these rulings that are delivered, that are taught in classes, they're well researched. This machine of researching and putting out this information is so well oiled. Like this is something that has been taught and studied for over 1,000 years. And one thing I love about Muslim scholarship, I love this, is that they do not take it easy on one another.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is no get out of jail free card. There is no quick pass. These people have argued and debated back and forth and tore down every argument 10 times around and forced the opposition to reconstruct their arguments 10 times around before even letting it slide. So the foundation on which these people give their verdicts and rulings is so robust. And I know a lot of people get turned off by the ritual again, the fiqhi rulings, because they feel that, you know, oh, but they differ so much and there are so many different opinions and so many variations. Is it really anything that's definitive? And the truth is that these different opinions exist because the Muslim scholarship is so broad that they look at their texts. It's not everyone is wearing, you know, the same cap. Everyone has a different perspective. Each of these madhabs, each of these school of thoughts, they represent, and this is what I think of all the time, and I say this to my students in the classroom, I believe they represent different personalities. The Shafi'i personality is distinct from the Hanafi personality, which is distinct from the Maliki personality, which is very different from the Hanbali personality. Like these are all very different personalities and they have a different way of thinking. And each one is looking at these texts and they're trying to think of the best implementation of this text. What's the best understanding of this text? So when it comes to the ritual, I think a few take-home points would be that making sure that our practice of Islam isn't just made up is very important. Generally, the word innovation in modern contexts and technology is considered as something very good. In engineering, you talk about innovation, thumbs up. When you talk about technology, innovation, thumbs up. But when we talk about religion, in particular, when it comes to worship, it's something that scholars are a little careful of.
Yeah.
So what if like, because again, I know there's a lot of questions regarding ritual and spiritual. We kind of went off on a usul tangent, but the question that a lot of people are going to have is like, well, is the ritual necessary? Right? Like in terms of if I can accomplish, for example, like what if meditation gives me the same feeling as prayer?
I think that's a part of Iman. That's a part of our belief. So one of the best ways to understand this issue of balancing spiritual and the ritual, it boils down to a famous narration, which many of us have heard of before. And if we haven't, we're about to hear it right now. We won't be covering the narration line by line, but I'm definitely going to ask Sheikh Abdul Nasser and Ustad Murphy to share their perspectives on this specific narration, which we commonly refer to as Hadith Jibreel. Where this anonymous person, he asks the Prophet ﷺ 3 questions. Now, the exact sequence of the questions, the narrations differ, but in some variations of this narration, the questioner, who later on we find out is Jibreel alayhi salam, the teacher of the Prophet ﷺ, he starts off by saying Mal Iman, and then he says Mal Islam, and then he says Mal Ihsan. And now in some narrations, the first two are flipped around. So he asks Mal Islam, Mal Iman, Mal Ihsan. Now, if you're wondering what this means, he says, what is faith? He starts off with faith because your submission to the ritual and the command of God will be dependent on your faith. Because the process is as important as the result and outcome. If you're only looking for the outcome, then what's faith going to offer you? But as a part of the faith system, we're not just offering you results, we're offering you a full process. And that process from beginning to end is so pure and it's so meaningful. So revelation delivers that process to you. Engage in this process, follow through, trust it. It might be basic and simple, not as exotic as what the next guy over is selling, but this basic thing really works. We believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls the state of the heart. We believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaching us through revelation that these actions are things that should be done and can be done to gain closest to him. You know, when we were doing our IFTA program, our specialization in Islamic law. Okay, so to create some context for those of you who aren't familiar with this, we had been studying Islamic law for 8 years by this point. Okay, so 8 years of studying Islamic law. Now we're in the specialization program. And my teacher, he asked us this question. He said, what is Sharia? Now, that seemed like a trick question because that's a question you ask someone in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. You're asking a group of students this question who have dedicated so many years, almost close to a decade, studying Sharia and Islamic law. So the students started engaging and each one started giving their own answer. You know, it's this, it's that, and a lot of different technical answers. And for the most part, everyone had a good point. But then the Sheikh, he really flipped it on us. And he said to us, Sharia is a combination of those secrets that if acted upon, the lover will find the path to the beloved direct and quick.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
He just flipped the whole thing. That this was no longer a matter of burden. Rather, this was a matter of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling you that you can do 100 things to get close to me.
It's an opportunity.
The quickest path and the most direct path is something called sajda. Now, whether you get it or not, I like it. This is what I want. This is what I want of you. I want you to do that sajda for me.
That reminds you of that hadith Qudsi where my slave doesn't come closer to me by means of anything as much as he does through what I obligated upon him.
Yeah.
مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُ عَلَيْهِ.
One of the things that I always tell people when this question comes up about like the importance of doing something a certain way is that, like, again, in life, especially, and this conversation is easier if the person has done any specialization in anything in their life, because what you realize is like any specialization in anything requires training and sequence and tartib and protocol. Anything, I mean, whether it's baking, whether it's medical professions, whether it's exercise, everything has like these sort of things that only the specialists appreciate. Mm-hmm. And everyone else just kind of thinks like, oh, you know what, it's all the same thing. Like Sheikh Abdel Nasser always makes fun of us when we bake things, right? So, we bake, and then he'll text us on the side like, hey, can you guys give me a slice?
Wallahi, I knew you were going there.
Wallahi, Sheikh, I knew you knew I was going there. And so like, when I first started baking stuff, like I used to not skip steps, but I would like combine them because I was like, this is inconvenient. It's
because you're an adult and you have better things to do.
That's true. Better things to do than to make food to feed my children. This is normal, by the way. This is so forced. It's not natural at all. But I used to combine.
Sorry, that really took a moment. Sorry.
I used to combine steps, and then like my products, like the loaves of bread or the pizza dough or whatever I made, would never come out right. And then I reached out to people and asked, and they were like, "Yeah, you're doing it wrong." Or if I made coffee, the same thing. If a person tries to, it's wrong. Exercise, same thing. Imagine like a surgeon like trying to do multiple things just because it's not as efficient or whatever. Same thing.
Skipping steps.
Yeah, skipping steps, not doing things in a ritual way. And there's protocol always. And so what I always tell people is that, subhanAllah, that the beauty in moments is in the details of that protocol. It's that submission. And that's why, subhanAllah, submission, I tell people, is like the first level of faith is submission. And then also the highest level of faith is submission. Because the first level is like a submission because you're afraid of punishment or you're afraid of hellfire. So you say, okay, I submit because I don't want to go to hell. But then the highest level is submission because you know that it's the best thing for you. And because you love Allah, ihsan, right? And ta'budullah ka'annaka tara, that you worship him as if you can see him. So you're still submitting, but now the submission is very different. It's not a submission that's unwilling, it's a willing submission, right? And so the number one place this happens, Mufti Saab, tell me I'm wrong. Hajj.
Yeah.
Hajj. The number one place this happens, guys. There is nothing more ritualistic than Hajj.
Mm-hmm.
There's literally no action in Islam more ritualistic, I've found, than Hajj.
And there's nothing more spiritual than it either.
Exactly. It's the height of spirituality and it's the height of ritual practice. It's both. Ramadan, same thing.
That's profound when you think about it.
Doesn't Ramadan have more ritual rules than your everyday life?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but people always say
the
it's
best
the
time of the
year. Exactly. So the idea that we run away from protocol, which I'm using synonymously here with ritual, right? The idea that if I run away from protocol and I can freelance and I can freeform and do what I want, first of all, it's not even true in your everyday life because it's not true. Like if you talk to a professional and you say, can I become a doctor without going to medical school? They say no. Can I become can I become a pilot without going to flight school? They would say no. There's protocol.
This might be a little bit controversial, or even like this might rock the boat a little. Let me ask you a question, because I mean, Mufti Saab and I might also have some thoughts on it, but it's kind of from a more traditional point of view. But from even like the kind of Western academic point of view, you did a degree in education, right?
Yeah.
Your initial training was as a school teacher.
Yes.
So when you hear that stuff a lot of times, like, oh, you can just hack education and you can make up your own system and you'd learn so much more and you'd be able to achieve so much more. And this, as an actual teacher, like, what do you hear when you hear that?
Well, so there's two things. There's the pedagogy and the methodology of education. And then there's the way that schools are run in America. Are schools run in America? Well, no, it depends on school district to school district, funding to funding. So for sure, can a person, achieve results better than a given school? Maybe, yeah, especially if it's not doing well and if it's not, if it's not staffed properly and all that kind of stuff. But there's no doubt that if you don't understand cognitive development, if you don't understand how learning happens, if you don't know who Piaget is, if you don't understand the theories of constructivism, of proximal development, of all these things that we learned, you won't understand education. You won't. You may be able to, some parts of it, you may be able to viscerally just kind of find, but you won't understand the nuances. You won't be able to replicate it, right? And you won't be able to understand exactly what's happening when you're doing it. And with Islam, it's the same thing. If I don't know why I'm doing something or think about it, the more I learn about that action, the more I become more like I fall in love with it. Like sajda. Why do we do sujood when we pray? This is the way the Prophet ﷺ prayed. That's why we do it. That's why you do sujood. But then you learn about sajda and you learn a lot of different things. Your sins fall off of your shoulders. It's the closest that you are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the place of dua. Like all of these things, you're like, wow, I love sajda now, right? But yeah, as an educator, for sure, being, and I see this all the time, man. I see people who don't understand education and they'll say things like, oh yeah, like we don't really care about like my kids, like early on, they don't really learn anything until like they're in first or second grade. And I'm like, it goes against all theory of early childhood education. There's so much learning that happens in the first 3 years of a kid's life that people have just been ignoring, right? Because they don't know. And so, yeah, I mean, it's essentially very similar conversation, which is specialists, understand, and people who they don't appreciate the ritual. They don't appreciate what it does for you and the doors that it opens for you. So going back to Mufti Kamani's point.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask, because I wanted to start kind of wrapping up as well, inshallah. So I think we talked a lot about, because I think all of us in a lot of our lectures and classes, and when we engage with the community, we all put a lot of emphasis on the spirituality and on the soul of things, right? You're always talking about that. Literally, I mean, every Monday your class is called Heart Work for a reason, right? I taught meaningful prayer, all across the country for years and years and years, just teaching people the meaning behind what they're saying in their prayer. But again, you got to pay attention. You got to know the words and then know the meaning of those words. And then you get the spirituality, right? So there is a structure. You're finding meaning within that structure. And Mufti Kamani is constantly talking about spirituality and the importance and significance of connecting your heart with Allah. So I liked it that we kind of like constructed the conversation where we said, yeah, but that should never be interpreted to mean that you just take the structure and just throw it out the window and you just have like this abstract like meaning and connection. And that's not how this works, because the structure itself is a part of the beauty of it and it feeds into the meaning of it. Like we said, we started off, right? You can buy the best furniture and the best furnishings for a house. If you ain't got four walls and a roof, where are you going to put all that? You
Yeah.
ain't got nowhere to put it.
And
So
they're
you
not enemies. They're not enemies, right?
They're
Like
not enemies. But having said all of that, we specifically had gotten some comments. Mufti Kamani had gotten some comments he had shared with us. But at the same time, because of kind of the overbearing, sometimes vibe and approach in the community, where the structure and the fiqh of it, the ritual of it, is kind of like that hammer that is just bashed. People are bashed over the head with it. And there's never, ever even a conversation about the ruhaniya, about the spirituality of it. Mufti Saab, if you could kind of talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon to hear that I took a CDAW class in my Sunday school, and it was overwhelming information in terms of names, dates, and places.
It was like
And-
battle.
and there was no connection with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or Islam. And that's why I'm gonna, there's one point I really want to mention, because if we had this night without mentioning this point, I think, at least on my part, there would have been something that I really wanted to say that I didn't get a chance to, and which is that one of the reasons why people are so particular about the ritual, in all reality, is because of their love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
yeah.
The Prophet did it. The love the Ummah has for the Prophet, it outweighs any intellectual argument. It outweighs any wisdom by 100 miles. We read the ayah of the Quran, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ. Say, O Muhammad, that if you, the people, love Allah, then follow me and God will come and love you. And he will forgive your sins. And so that's like bonus, right? So Allah will come and love you and he will forgive your sins. You open up any classical text of hadith and they have a bab, al-i'tisam bil-kitabi wa sunnah, right? Which is a whole chapter dedicated to holding firmly to the sunnah, the method of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, whoever follows my way is from me, and kana ma'i fil jannah, in one narration where the Prophet said, and that person will be with me, and the one who turns away from me, it isn't from me. Al-mar'u ma'a man ahab, a person will be with the one who he loves. And I think these are all extremely important discussions.
And it's one of the actual, going back to your first point you brought up, Mufti Saab, which is the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam will recognize people on the Day of Judgment by the marks of
wudu.
And wudu is like, it's historically it's been talked about as like one of the biggest obstacles for people spiritually is to make wudu for salah, right? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Like it's just common. I don't know why. It's just a common narrative. Like we'll do, and I get it. Like sometimes you're like in a rush or you don't. It's inconvenient or whatever. I understand that, but it's interesting that the Prophet will recognize people by something that he's not going to recognize them by their by like the hadith doesn't say he's going to recognize them by their iman even, or by their the length of their thobe or beard or whatever. It's literally an action that is just all ritual. Right? It's all ritual. If anyone's been in any relationship before, I'll finish by saying this. This will be my final thing. If anyone's been in any relationship, whether it's, family, marriage, professional, friends, and I know, and everybody knows that there are details that are necessary that don't quite make sense to you, but you do them because you love somebody. And when you do them enough out of love for that person, then you discover a pleasure in doing them that again is not logical, but because you love the person and you know that they love it, like you start to feel something special, right? Like if your family likes a certain kind of food and you don't like it, but you make it or you buy it or you bring it home because you know they love it, seeing the smile on their face makes you so happy, right? And to me, when I try to explain religiosity to people, religiosity being the ritual side of religion, when I try to explain religiosity, I say, look, you do this without necessarily fully understanding exactly why you're doing it, because you understand that it's what Allah and His Messenger love. And shortly, soon enough, you will love it just because you know that they love it.
Allah.
Right? There's a story of that person who was eating melons and was crying. And someone asked him, why are you crying? And he goes, I hate watermelon. But then I read a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ ate watermelon, and I didn't want to hate what he loved. He said, I didn't want to be the person who did not like what the Prophet ﷺ liked to eat. Right?
Yeah, there's a story. I'm not sure about the authenticity of the story about Qadi Abu Yusuf. That somebody, he was eating and somebody said something about like squash, like the Prophet
Yeah.
was fond of squash, and he's like, oh, I don't like squash, it's not good, and this and that. And he said, I got so offended, I was afraid that I was gonna like physically attack the person.
Oh, subhanallah. Yeah.
Ajib.
So again, and this is any relationship. Like you and I all know this, right? If you've been in any relationship, if you're honest with yourself and you think about it, you've done things for people because you love them. And then you've come to love doing that thing because you realize it makes them happy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where religiosity meets spirituality. That's where it meets. Like when you wake up for Fajr, you're conquering your body, saying, I'm tired, I don't want to get up. And it's the whole process of it, in the beginning especially, it sucks. Like getting up, you're tired, you know that your kids are going to be awake. It's very difficult. You went to bed late last night. But the feeling you get when you say salam, salam, you can't buy that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for sale, right? And you ask yourself when you're done with Fajr, why is it so painful for me to think about, like, why don't I do this? Why don't I get up earlier? Why don't I pray more? You know, you pray Qiyam al-Layl during Ramadan, and you're like, why don't I do this more? That's where religiosity turns into spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know,
Making the mundane meaningful.
You have to climb the mountain to appreciate the view from the top.
Oh, wow.
You can't appreciate the view from the top without climbing it. And climbing it is not always easy. It's not. Like, and people who try to say, oh, yeah, religion's easy. It's not easy.
Especially, it's quite difficult for you. I remember when I smoked you on the way up to like Ghar Hira, I remember.
Sheikh, that was my third time going up. I went up and down, up and down, up and down.
I swear, we were climbing Ghar Hira that one time. And Mufti Kamani like has like these super long like spider legs.
Yeah.
And he was like the first one on the top. I was like, what just happened?
I was scared because of the random baboons and goats. So I was like watching, I was trying to watch your back, Sheikh. I was looking behind you to make sure that a goat wasn't attacking you. No, but absolutely, that hard work is necessary. And it's not always the most, by the way, it's not always the most fantastic, you know, spiritual feeling. I'm going to put that out there. It's not. You know, even we were talking today about the ayah that we were doing tafsir of, the ayah of وَآتَ الْمَالَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ. Yeah, and the tafsir of that ayah, there's a hadith that's very beautiful where the Prophet ﷺ said that, you know, a person, the best sadaqah that a person can give, I believe it's in Abu Dawud, I believe this hadith, Abu Dawud. So the best sadaqah a person can give is the sadaqah when everything is going well in their life, but they're afraid of poverty.
Yeah.
And they still give it before they die, because once they're dying, it's not even their wealth anymore.
Sahihun shahihun takhsha al-faqr.
Yeah, sahihun harisun. What was I forget the something al-baqa, right? Something al-baqa wal khasha al-faqra. Yeah. So you know, it's not easy. It's when you fear poverty, giving wealth is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But when you do it, you're like, wow. Like, wow, I never expected that it would have felt this fulfilling. And then you taste ihsan, that little bit. We ask Allah Ta'ala to grant us that, honestly.
You know, Sheikh, if I can touch on that point that you asked me a few moments ago, I think that was a very good point. That we definitely have a culture, and I know we've been kind of arguing and discussing the one side of the discussion, which is don't dismiss the ritual. Very important. The spiritual will come through being consistent with the ritual. But there definitely is an abuse on the other side, which is that many folks in their teaching do not take the spiritual element into consideration at all. It's just kind of battered into people. Like you have that masjid that is giving a Jummah khutbah, and there is no spiritual stimulation in that Jummah khutbah at all. Mm-hmm. And you have a community that's depleted, they're deprived, really exhausted. They're not finding any joy in their ibadah. One thing is the tone that it's being taught to them. There's no calmness, no love, no muhabba, and people don't connect to it. Most of us, we know that we enjoy our worship because someone taught it to us in a loving fashion. You know, someone can tell me to do something extremely difficult, but if they say it with love. I remember being young and my father saying to me, Hussein, I would like for you to memorize the Quran. And that was the beginning of a 4-year journey. But it was with so much compassion and so much love that it went a very far way. On the other hand, and this is where things might get a little, I might be rocking the boat a little, but I think it's important to have.
Real quickly to interject, you and I have actually spoken about, and you've shared, I remember you being very passionate on this issue, that we're very nervous about who teaches our kids deen, because you've talked about, like, I don't want somebody sitting there drilling the deen into my kids. I want them to like nurture this love of the deen within them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went through that growing up, and I wouldn't want that for anyone, where they're just going through the rituals, and at some point it feels so exhausting, and everyone's saying this is the right religion, and you're thinking in your heart without being able to verbalize it, is it really? But you can't say it. You can't say it, because if you say it, everyone looks down upon you, and there's no one there to show you any compassion, any love. And this is what happens with so many young folks in our community. You have people showing up to college campuses, giving khutbahs. They come once a year for one khutbah, and they just take a bat and they swing it as hard as they can, knocking down as many as people, because everyone clearly has flaws. Just go there, shout at them, tell them how bad they are, how messed up they are, how angry God is at them, and just walk out of there with your chest puffed out, because that makes you feel good. Now, in the hearts of these folks, they're thinking, okay, I know that I messed up, but is there no compassion here? And we have this attitude where we just use the religion. I think of people using the religion kind of like a baseball bat or like some kind of brass knuckle, where they're coming in as punching and beating people with it. And as far as factual statements go, maybe a lot of what they're saying is factually true. Maybe it is based in the Quran. Maybe this statement is something Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam alluded towards, but that tone clearly wasn't the Prophet's. I find it very offensive when someone chooses to say a statement attributing it to Allah or the Messenger while they're in a state of anger, because that's not how the statement was said.
And
Nabi
also,
Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said it with so much love and so much calmness and so much mahabba, and you're going and shouting at people, oh, you're not wearing a hijab. Oh, you're not growing a beard. Oh, you're dealing with interest. Oh, you're doing this. And these are all things that are very important. We understand them. But where's the compassion and
also,
love?
but also when you're narrating on the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam or narrating back to him, like, what's your ratio, right? You know, "Ma arsalnaka illa rahmatan lil alamin." That's his asl. That's his asl. Like, what's your asl and what's your ratio? How are you addressing things? The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, even if you look at Surah Al-Fatiha, right? The amount of times that Rahma or Rahman, Rahim is mentioned, Rabb is mentioned, before once even Maliki Yawmiddin is mentioned. 4 or 5 times. And that's how Allah chose to introduce himself. One of the greatest tragedies in the ummah today, like what you're saying, is that people introduce Allah in a different way than he introduces himself.
La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah.
Literally, he introduces himself what? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. 5 times Rahman, Rahim, Rabb, Rahman, Rahim. 5 times mercy, nurturing, loving, right? And then Maliki Yawmiddin. Then it, but people introduce him first, Shadidul Aqab, right? Like the first thing, that you learn about Allah is how great his punishment is. That's such a shame. You didn't introduce him how he introduced himself. How would you feel if somebody introduced you in a way that maybe you said something once, but they introduced you, the first thing they told somebody was that one statement. And again, there's no context, there's no anything. Yeah, sure, Allah Ta'ala created hellfire. Sure, there's punishment, of course. But is that the first thing he said?
No.
And if he didn't say that, why didn't he say it that way? And if you believe that Allah Ta'ala had a rhyme and reason and wisdom into how things were revealed, then you're doing a huge injustice. That's Absolutely. A big, even the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. If you think the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had the question is, do you think he had a strategy? Do you think he had a strategy with how he was teaching people?
For sure.
Okay, so if you're not doing it that way, then you're doing a huge injustice to him.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're cutting through all this meticulous.
But you're being a snowflake right now, and I'm not trolling. I'm literally quoting a statement. You're being a snowflake right now because
no, I just know Sira and you don't. That's what I say back to them. When people say things like that, like, oh, you're just being so liberal, blah blah. I'm like, bro,
you're being so soft right now. You're not paying attention to the message. That's the sort of objection that comes in. Ustad Murphy's point is phenomenal.
One thing I said at Isna, and I'll say it again, and I mean it. I think that if there are people today that if they met the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam today and how he interacted with people and how he treated people, they would think he was being too soft.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. I think there are people today that would, may Allah forgive me for even bringing this image to people's minds because it's an uncomfortable thing to say. But I think that when Sheikh Abdul Nasser, for example, teaches Sirah, or when Mufti Kamani teaches Sirah, or anybody, and they bring these narrations, Why is your first response that you're being too soft? I don't understand. Like, do you not know who they're talking about? Do you not understand the person that's being spoken about? It's not them that's being soft. Your heart is reacting in a weird way to hearing the story of the Prophet. That's not a good sign. That's not a good sign, you know? And maybe it has to do with your upbringing. Maybe it has to do with the way your parents were. Maybe it has to do with trauma you've been through in your life. I don't know. But if you hear a story about the Prophet giving someone an allowance, giving a person who fornicated a chance to walk free, giving up an alcoholic, you know, this, teaching a young person, and that bothers you when people bring up those stories, it bothers you. Yeah. I'm scared for you.
You know, Ustad Murphy, if I may, earlier today on my social media platforms, when we post a flyer for today's Hangout, I posed some questions, and I asked, what was your experience learning Islam? Was the focus more on knowing the rules without enough emphasis on spirituality? Or was it based on do it as long as it feels good with neglect to the legal aspect? Or would you describe it as properly balanced? Now, there were a lot of answers that I got from this question. And as I pose this question here, I also asked those who are on the stream right now, if you have any thoughts on this question, that, you know, how was Islam delivered to you? We'd love to hear it, because this helps us understand the community and understand what kind of experiences people have had in relation to their learning of Islam. So now, one of the answers, one of the comments that I got, the focus was based around a lot of punishment, rules, everything you should refrain from, and what punishment it involved. Salah was used as a form of punishment. It's only when I grew up and I realized how negatively I was taught. There should be more focus on the spirituality of it. Love Allah and His Messenger, peace be upon him. The rewards, the spiritual impact a certain action or deed has. Allah's mercy. I'm not saying it should have been entirely that, but initially, the beauty of the religion should be embedded. The love for Salah, worship, it should be instilled. If that base is strong, naturally anything that will remotely upset Allah would be refrained from. It's just my personal experience.
You know, I had a rule when I used to do teen halaqas. I used to tell the teenagers, how many of you are here because you're being punished? Like, it's a consequence. Like, you know, your parents were like, oh, you're in trouble, and now you have to go to the masjid, the halaqa, or whatever. And if like 2 or 3 kids would raise their hands, I would tell them, like, go to the gym and just play basketball. And I would tell parents when they picked them up, I said, never make my class a punishment. That's not fair to me, and it's not fair to your kids. Never make my class a punishment. Never associate religion with punishment. Never. That's not fair. It's not right. You know, the Prophet ﷺ never told somebody, you committed a sin, come here, you have to pray with me now, 20 rakat. Like, that's not how it worked, right? And we wonder why the association is there. So anyways, this conversation could go on forever. I know that.
I have a final question for you guys if we're heading towards the close off. Sheikh, may I?
Yeah, please.
Since we have talked about ritual and spiritual, I'm sure there are folks here who want to learn about the ritual part of it, and they're interested in learning about the spiritual too. Do you guys have any recommendations? This is the recommendation part. Do you have any recommendations on things to do, things to listen to, books to read, videos to watch that can help folks grow in their understanding of fiqh and grow in their understanding of tazkiyah, ihsan, spirituality?
Sierra podcast, for sure. I would say Sheikh Abdul Nasser Sierra podcast.
What is that going to help with? The fiqh part or the tazkiyah part? I think
Mufti Kamani is the chosen one. If you do that first, because it's how many episodes was it, Mufti Sab? 23. Perfect. 23 episodes. So you can finish that before even Ramadan. Honestly, if you get a couple in, if you get a couple in on a couple days and you kind of double up, that provides people with a framework of what Islam is, right? Because again, having the framework is very important. Any Sirah is very, very good. So Mufti Kamani, I would recommend that. And then I would recommend one book that I really like for people for like a spiritual curriculum is called In the Early Hours by Khurram Murad. And he's a contemporary, Muslim community worker and servant, mashallah. But I believe he's from the UK, but he wrote this book and it basically was his reflections on how to develop a person's spirituality within the context of deeds. And so, he was very big on sort of like tying the two together, like, making Fajr a spiritual thing, like not just making Fajr like a checking it off the list type of thing. So that book I recommend to a lot of people, and it's also very short. It's maybe 80 pages. I think there's a Kindle version as well. So if you want to download it digitally, you can. That's where I would get started. Inshallah, you can check the Qalam book list for more recommendations, inshallah. Sheikh Saab.
Mufti Kamani, I was going to ask, Bidayatul Hidayah, what would you say that's good for?
I would say Bidayatul Hidayah is a phenomenal experience for both. Because it definitely has a lot of the legal rulings for the actions, be it that it's primarily Shafi'i, because Imam Ghazali was Shafi'i, but there is the first half of the book definitely focuses on a good amount of fiqhi rulings, legal rulings, and obviously infused with a lot of spirituality. And the second and third part of the book, which is more or less the second half of the book, focuses primarily just on spirituality.
And you have a series on that, right?
The beginning.
Alhamdulillah, I had a chance to teach that book, and the audios of it are recorded again on the Qalam podcast.
Okay, so yeah, because
someone's asking, if I may, Brother Hisham here's asking, what was the first source again on the Sirah? I think that's a podcast.
Sheikh Nasr's Sirah podcast, which is the Qalam Sirah podcast, is like 200 hours of Sirah. If that's overwhelming, you're not alone. Don't worry. But you can build up to it. It's very detailed. That's why Sheikh spent a lot of time. But it's not boring. It's just detailed. It took him, I think, 10 years or 9 years to finish. But Mufti Kamani did a seerah that was literally built as a gateway into seerah studies, the chosen one. 23 episodes, 23 hours roughly. So you can listen to that, inshallah, and then in the early hours. Mufti Saab, the reason why I brought that up is because Imam Ghazali, rahmatullahi alayhi, I always tell people whenever they pick up a Ghazali book, I say, this is great. Realize that you might need a teacher. Yeah. Because some of the things that he says, or the way, even his language sometimes you have to decipher through a little bit. So I would recommend if people are going to do Bidayatul Hidayah, I would recommend them listening to your series along with it, inshallah, so that they could get the most out of it.
And I wanted to kind of also mention once again that, this is meant to be, this is just a conversation amongst us. This is us reminding each other that we do need to remember to focus on the form of it so that we can achieve the maximum potential. But at the same time, like everybody said, it's also very tragic to imagine somebody who fulfilled all the physical aspects, like for instance of their salah, their whole life, prayed for 40, 50, 60 years, and never actually even once experienced a conversation with Allah.
Allah.
The hadith, right?
La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah.
This happened. This happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. This happened in his life. Go back and pray because you haven't prayed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then at-taqwa hahuna, the idea, like, yeah, absolutely, Sheikh.
And so for all those folks that are out there that have grown kind of fatigued and tired and weary of being just kind of beat down with the expectations of the physical requirements of something, and it's kind of like, where's the soul of this thing? Your point is very well taken, and it's
meaningful prayer, Sheikh. Meaningful prayer. That class, may Allah reward Sheikh Abdul Nasser for it. I've alhamdulillah had the honor of traveling the country and going to so many communities. I can say hands down, that class has really helped people appreciate their salah. I mean, I don't know how many people have told me from East Coast to West Coast that taking this class really helped them understanding their salah. This discussion of ritual and spiritual is much more exasperated when it comes to immigrants, because we don't understand, or non-Arab speaking folks, we don't understand any Arabic at all. So it could be really ritual, very dry, and have no idea what's going on. And taking that class of Sheikh Abdul Nasser, I haven't taken it personally, but I've heard so many people who have taken it. I mean, right here, there's this person, sister. I'm assuming it's a sister. So, or there's a person commenting here, Khushbacht Sana. Right away, the comment comes in. Love the meaningful salah. Right. I mean, that right there, the meaningful prayer class is a phenomenal resource.
Meaningful salah. I think somebody else taught that. Sheikh Abdul Nasser taught meaningful prayer. Yeah.
So that, I mean, I just wanted to say that it's a point very well taken. We've all felt those frustrations. And one of the things I was going to try to conclude here with is that at the end of the day, like Ustad was saying earlier, they're not enemies of one another. And like Mufti Kamani said, that one complements the other. There's a verse of the Quran that kind of encapsulates that there's an ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about hypocrites. So it's got a little bit of a harsh tone to it. But Allah says, Innal munafiqina yukhadi'una Allah wa khadi'uhum. They think that they're fooling God, but in reality, God has actually deceived them. And or God has basically turned their deception on them. And then it says, وَإِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ قَامُوا كُسَالَى يُرَاءُونَ النَّاسَ وَلَا يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. So it talks about how they're hollow on both ends. When they stand for prayer, they're all lazy. So the form is bad. They're just showing off to people, and they don't. Their heart is not connected to Allah. So Allah says the form is rotten, and the spirit is rotten. The ritual is messed up, and the spirituality is absent. And that's why the antithesis of that, the opposite of that, the salah of the Prophet ﷺ, was that the ritual was so beautiful and perfect, and the spirituality was so complete.
Yeah.
That's basically, we have to kind of work our way there.
And if you're experiencing, by the way, like a gap in your spirituality, and you're wondering like when it's going to kick in, or if you're experiencing a gap in your ritual practice and you're wondering what's going to motivate you to get there, I had a realization personally that I wanted to share with everybody, and this is something that I think helped me immensely. So, and this didn't happen internally. It obviously came from teachers like Sheikh Al Nasr, Mufti Kamani, and I remember Dr. Akram actually from the UK. He mentioned something very powerful when someone asked him like, "What happens if we pray we don't feel?" He said, "We don't worship feelings, we worship Allah." And that's a very Dr. Akram thing to say, which is why Sheikh
it is.
But I think like, if you hear him saying it, it's one way, but if you think about the statement, it's very powerful, which is that, don't think about yourself so much, think about Allah. If you think about yourself, you might get caught, thinking about, am I in the mood? Am I motivated? Just think about Allah. Just think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes the heart leads and the body follows. If you're lucky enough to have that internal motivation, your heart is leading you and your body's following. But sometimes your body leads and your heart follows.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to get up and just do it. I mean, everything for me is an exercise analogy for some reason, because I'm not like in shape or anything, but everything for me is like an exercise analogy. Like there are those days where you want to work out, and there are those days where you do not want to work out. And at the end of both workouts, you're happy you did it.
Yeah.
Right? The days that you wanted to, alhamdulillah. The days that you didn't want to, it's like pulling teeth, but getting there, when you finish, you're like, I'm so happy that I did it. It may have not been the best looking, it may have not been the greatest, but alhamdulillah that I did it. And I think with ibadah, it's the same thing. Sometimes your heart will push you to do it, sometimes it won't, but it'll follow if your body leads, right? So just know that you're going to be blessed on some days to have your heart push you. Some days you won't be blessed to have that, but Allah is giving you a chance to prove your sincerity on the days where you don't feel like it. Right? Those are the days where you can prove your ikhlas. We ask Allah Ta'ala to grant us ikhlas, inshallah, and make us people who practice what we say. I don't want anyone to think here that we're masters of this, because everyone here.
That's why we're talking to each other. We're just trying to work through it ourselves.
It's always awkward having these conversations, because it's like I said, it's like sharing a workout routine. This is what I'm trying to do. Let me share it with you guys or whatnot. But anyways, jazakumullah khairan, guys. I appreciate it. Mufti Saab, I want to send my heartfelt condolences about your chai cup.
Everyone make dua that Allah.
My chai cup has been replaced, guys. I told you I'm going to tell you later. I have an update now. I have an update.
Someone bought you another one.
They shipped it to his house.
Listen, can I get one?
My wife knew that I wouldn't last. So
Allahu Akbar.
Wow.
Allah. So does that mean I can have your campus one?
No.
Oh, that's so mimman. That was the most. You're like, I'm gonna sell it.
Sell it on eBay. But Mufti Saab, if you could close us off with a dua, because it was such a important conversation that's so personal to so many people. If you could just close it off with a dua.
Okay, so as I close this this gathering of ours, we definitely need a round two just on the spirituality part, tips, advices and whatnot. Inshallah, we will try to follow this up with another session. But I close off by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward you all for joining us tonight. It's late. You guys have stayed awake and to join us for this conversation. We would enjoy this conversation, the three of us, but having you guys with us makes it so much more enjoyable. Reading your comments and having you guys give input to the conversation really fuels our energy. It fuels us and gives us energy to to gather and to give time for this. Really appreciate it, guys. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards every one of you guys for being here, supporting us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you guys a high maqam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept this gathering of ours. Anything wrong that was said, disrespectful, anything that we said that was out of line, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us. We are all students of knowledge and we're all learning. These conversations help us think further and go further. And it gives a voice of reason and hopefully a light heart to those who are joining us in this conversation. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants the reward to all of our teachers and the folks who've put effort into us being here today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward the ummah at large. And with that, we close. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses us with all the good that the Prophet asked for and protects us from all the evil that the Prophet sought protection in. As I close, folks, just one last time, please do share this conversation of ours and all of our conversations that you found beneficial with your friends and family. There are a lot of people who are looking for things to benefit from, and they're not sure what to listen to. And if you found this beneficial, maybe you can share it with someone else who you think could benefit from hearing this. Usually we're not the type of people who ask for likes. It actually feels very lowly to ask for it. But the reason why we actually even bring this up is because it'll help the content get out. You know, we don't run algorithms. I don't understand algorithms. There are people at Qalam who are really good at social media stuff, and they know this stuff very well. And they're always telling us that, apparently how social media works is all about the likes and the shares and the comments. The truth is that, these conversations would occur regardless of any likes, any comments, or any shares. But by you playing your part, it helps us reach a bigger audience and helps us connect with more people. So anything that you have.
I personally don't care about the likes or shares. I know that none of us do, but I do think one point Mufti Kamani is trying to say is that if you found it beneficial, then maybe somebody else, it'll help them too.
And especially just the topic today,
yeah.
There's a lot of people carrying a lot of hurt in regards to it.
Yes, and and if you have any ideas for future topips, please reach out and send them. We would love to.
Yeah, any ideas that anyone has for any topics, please, go and we'll post something on the Facebook pages asking for topic suggestions, on Instagram, on Twitter, wherever you can reach out and leave those comments. And then, alhamdulillah, as we all navigate this time together, Qalam as an institution, all of us together, we're here for y'all. We're here to serve y'all. We're here in the service of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tomorrow, Monday night, you can log on to Ustad Abdurrahman's Instagram or Facebook page, and you can watch the Heartwork lecture, which is also covering Seerah. On Tuesday, you can come on here or on the Qalam page or on my Instagram, and you can come and log on to our tafsir class. These are classes we were doing on a weekly basis in the community. Wednesday, we'll all be, Sheikh Mikhail has a class on the Qalam page. We'll all be congregating for a little hangout again Wednesday evening. And then this Thursday, we'll be releasing the information tomorrow. This Thursday, we're going to host a workshop for the fiqh of Ramadan, the fiqh of fasting, the fiqh of like praying Taraweeh. How do you pray Taraweeh? How do you properly fast? How do you pray Taraweeh? What is i'tikaf? We're going to have a workshop for all of that completely free. And you'll be able to sign up on the Qalam website, inshallah. You'll see the information posted tomorrow. So we're here for y'all. We're serving y'all all throughout, inshallah. Just stay connected, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all of us. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.